Why do you run so frantically toward the mirage of financial abundance, convinced that a heavier purse will finally silence the screaming void within your chest? You have spent a lifetime treating your external destitution as the primary disease, entirely blind to the fact that your pursuit of gold is merely a frantic, clumsy attempt to bribe your own internal ghosts into silence. The modern man works himself to the bone, accumulating digital numbers in a bank account, chasing an idealized state of freedom that exists only as an intellectual concept, while remaining a complete and utterly helpless slave to the unexamined compulsions of his own mind. You believe you want wealth, but what you actually crave is a permanent anesthesia against the terrifying realization that you do not know who you are when you stop producing. Peace is not a state of financial security, it is the terrifying stillness that remains when you finally stop running away from your own shadow, a stillness most of you will do anything to avoid. You are trapped in a self-inflicted exile, enduring a profound internal friction where your conscious ego desperately pretends to be the master of its house, while your repressed, unlived life dictates every single failure you mistake for bad luck. Look closely at the exhaustion that gnaws at your bones late at night, that subtle, creeping dread that arises precisely when you achieve a milestone you thought would bring you solace. That is the internal crisis of a soul split in two, a conscious persona wearing the armor of ambition, and an unconscious shadow holding the keys to everything you have denied about yourself. This script, this final lesson, is not a manual for manifestation, nor is it a comforting pat on the back to tell you that everything will be fine. It is a deliberate dismantling of the illusions you hold about prosperity, designed to force you to look directly into the abyss of your own psyche, because until you cross that threshold, neither wealth, nor peace, nor freedom will ever be anything more than words you use to decorate your misery. 1. The treasury of the shadow. Your poverty is not financial, it is the psychological bankruptcy that occurs when you bury your most potent, primal energies because they terrify your fragile sense of morality. The very traits you need to conquer your external reality, your capacity for aggression, your ruthlessness, your unyielding desire for power, are the exact elements you have cast out into the dark corners of your unconscious, labeling them as evil to protect your comforting identity as a good person. By refusing to look at your capacity for malice, you have not become holy, you have merely become harmless, naive, and utterly defenseless against a world that respects only strength. You look at those who possess great wealth and influence with a mixture of envy and moral superiority, whispering to yourself that you are above such vulgar desires, yet this judgment is nothing more than a defensive projection hiding your own profound cowardice. The shadow is not a monster to be destroyed, but a treasure house of raw, unrefined vital energy that you have locked away because you lack the stomach to govern it. When you suppress your darker, more assertive impulses, they do not vanish. They rot in the basement of your mind, souring into passive aggression, chronic resentment, and a strange, subconscious self-sabotage that ensures you remain broke and dependent. You unconsciously wreck your own professional opportunities and financial ventures because, at a deeper level, your ego is terrified of the responsibility and the raw, dangerous power that true autonomy demands. To step into genuine abundance, you must first have the courage to acknowledge that you possess the exact same capacity for greed, cruelty, and destruction as the tyrants you condemn. True psychological wholeness requires you to consciously integrate these rejected fragments, dragging them out of the dark and into the light of awareness where their power can be harnessed and directed toward your deliberate goals. Imagine the shift in your posture, the sudden weight of voice, when you no longer look at the world as a victim begging for alms, but as a fully conscious being who has looked into his own internal abyss and mastered the beasts within. You must stop playing the role of the tragic, misunderstood saint who is too pure for the material world, and realize that your poverty is a choice made by an ego that is simply too terrified to grow up. Wealth flies from the fragile, the timid, and the self-righteous because it requires a psychological container strong enough to hold intense tension without cracking. Only when you possess your shadow, rather than letting it possess you, will you find the visceral, unshakable grounding necessary to command your material fate. 2. The golden cage of the persona. Look at the mask you wear so proudly for society, the exhausting, highly curated identity of the successful professional, the dependable provider, or the enlightened seeker, and ask yourself who is actually living your life. You have spent decades building this persona, this psychological skin, carefully tailoring it to match the expectations of your parents, your peers, and the faceless masses of the social game, completely oblivious to the fact that it has become your sarcophagus. You think you are chasing freedom, but every action you take is dictated by a desperate, frantic need to maintain the approval of an audience that does not care if your soul dies in the process. The car you drive, the titles you covet, even the vocabulary you use to describe your high-minded aspirations are rarely your own. They are the scripts handed to you by a collective conscience that demands your total conformity. The great tragedy of the persona is that you eventually mistake the mask for your true face, and when this happens, your authentic self is forced to go underground, starved of expression and air. You experience a profound, structural boredom, an emptiness that no amount of luxury consumption or external validation can fill, because you are feeding a fictional character while the real human being inside is dying of neglect. You buy things you do not need with money you do not have to impress people you do not even like, trapped in an endless, cyclical loop of psychological debt that keeps you tethered to a life of quiet desperation. This is why peace eludes you, even in your moments of leisure. You cannot rest because the actor must never break character, lest the audience realize that behind the elaborate costume lies a terrified, hollow shell. To break out of this golden cage, you must endure the painful, deeply destabilizing process of stripping away these social adaptations, allowing the false certainties of your public identity to collapse under the weight of reality. This is not a call to become a social outcast or an irresponsible rebel, but an invitation to realize that the persona is merely a tool for communication, not the essence of your being. When you detach your self-worth from your social performance, the frantic anxiety that drives your economic desperation begins to evaporate, leaving behind a sharp, clinical clarity. You no longer seek wealth to prove your value to a world that is itself profoundly sick. Instead, you navigate the material world with the cool detachment of a grandmaster playing a game, using the rules rather than being used by them. 3. The deception of external freedom. You speak of freedom as if it were a geographic location or a specific balance in your checking account, a magical day in the future when you will finally have permission to breathe without permission. This is the great lie of the modern ego, the belief that spatial mobility and financial liquidity can somehow liberate a mind that remains chained to its own unresolved traumas and neuroses. I have met men of immense wealth, men who could fly to any corner of the globe at a moment's notice, who were more profoundly imprisoned than any convict, bound tight by their paranoid anxieties, their fragile vanities, and their insatiable, addictive need for more control. If you take a fractured, anxious, and deeply divided mind and place it on a private beach in the tropics, you will simply have a fractured, anxious, and deeply divided mind sitting in the sun, listening to the same old internal tormentors. True freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want. It is the radical deliverance from the unconscious compulsions that force you to want the wrong things in the first place. You think you are acting out of free will when you pursue a specific career or enter into a lucrative but soul-crushing partnership, but you are merely obeying the unexamined commands of your childhood programming. You are trying to solve an internal problem, a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy, a fear of abandonment, an unhealed wound inflicted by an emotionally distant parent, using external tools that are completely unsuited for the task. You cannot fix a structural flaw in your soul with a new house, a faster vehicle, or a higher tax bracket, and the longer you try, the more exhausted and cynical you will become. The moment you realize that your frantic drive for material acquisition is actually a misplaced spiritual search, the entire structure of your reality undergoes a violent, necessary shift. You begin to understand that freedom is an internal state of non-attachment, a psychological spaciousness that allows you to experience both lack and abundance without losing your center. This realization is incredibly uncomfortable because it robs you of your favorite excuse. You can no longer blame your misery on your boss, your economy, or your lack of capital. You are forced to admit that you are your own jailer, and that the gates of your prison have been unlocked the entire time, waiting only for you to have the courage to turn around and walk out. 4. The inflation of the economic ego. There is an insidious sickness that infects those who begin to experience the first tastes of material success, the profound, intoxicating delusion of ego inflation, where the conscious mind believes it is the sole creator of its good fortune. You achieve a minor victory, your business grows, your investments yield profit, and immediately your ego swells with a dangerous, arrogant hubris, convinced that you are smarter, bolder, and more deserving than the rest of humanity. You forget that you are merely riding the unpredictable currents of a vast, interconnected psychic and physical ecosystem, and you begin to attribute to your own intellect what was largely a gift of timing and unconscious alignment. This inflation is the psychological prelude to a catastrophic fall, because an swollen ego loses its capacity for self-criticism, cuts itself off from reality, and invariably drives itself straight off a cliff. When you become infatuated with your own power, you unconsciously begin to alienate the very forces that sustained your ascent, treating people as mere stepping stones and viewing the world through a lens of cold, predatory calculation. You become blind to your own vulnerabilities, dismissing the subtle warning signs in your business, your health, and your personal relationships because your arrogance tells you that you are untouchable. This state of mind is a profound violation of psychic equilibrium, and the unconscious will always move to correct it, often through a sudden, devastating failure that shatters your financial standing and forces you back to earth. The market, the economy, and the sudden turns of fate are not cruel, they are merely the objective mirrors that reflect your inner imbalance back to you with brutal, mathematical precision. To build an abundance that lasts, you must develop a deep, enduring psychological humility, recognizing that your conscious intellect is merely the captain of a small ship sailing on a vast, unfathomable ocean of unconscious forces. When success arrives, it must be met not with self-congratulatory pride, but with a quiet, solemn sense of stewardship, understanding that wealth is an energetic responsibility that tests the character of a person far more severely than poverty ever could. You must remain small in your own eyes, keeping your feet firmly planted on the ground of self-examination, even as your external achievements reach the sky. Only when the ego is properly aligned as a servant to a higher psychic center, the self, can you possess great wealth without being possessed, corrupted, and ultimately destroyed by it. 5. The projection of the savior archetype. Stop waiting for a political savior, a brilliant financial mentor, or a perfect economic turnaround to rescue you from the stagnation of your current existence. You have projected the ancient, mythological archetype of the savior onto the external world, looking outside yourself for some powerful figure or event that will miraculously wave a wand and dissolve your financial anxieties. This projection is a defense mechanism born out of a profound refusal to accept your own adulthood, a cowardly longing to return to the safety of infancy where someone else was responsible for your survival and comfort. Every time you buy a lottery ticket, join a speculative financial cult, or pin your hopes on a new government policy, you are abdicated your sovereign authority and handing your power over to forces that do not know your name. This constant looking outward creates a state of perpetual, neurotic dependency, ensuring that your emotional state is entirely dictated by factors completely beyond your control. If the market goes up, you are temporarily ecstatic; if it dips, you fall into a dark, paralyzing despair, living your life as a helpless leaf blown about by the chaotic winds of external circumstance. You have turned your financial situation into a theological drama, where you are the helpless sinner praying for a miracle from a fickle, indifferent god of commerce. The truth is cold and unforgiving. No one is coming to save you, no macroeconomic shift will cure your internal poverty, and no mentor can do the agonizing work of psychic integration for you. The dissolution of this projection is an intensely painful experience. It feels like an existential abandonment, a cold realization that you are completely alone on the battlefield of your life. Yet, this exact disillusionment is the birth of true maturity, the precise moment when you pull your projected power back into your own psyche and realize that the savior you have been weeping for is staring back at you from the mirror. When you accept total, unconditional responsibility for your material and spiritual condition, a fierce, protective sovereignty awakens within you. You stop asking for permission, you stop whining about the unfairness of the system, and you begin to build your own reality with the raw material of your focused, unshakable will. 6. The tyranny of scarcity consciousness. You are haunted by a primal, ancestral terror of lack, an archaic hunger that no amount of material accumulation can ever fully satisfy or appease. This scarcity consciousness is not a rational response to your actual financial numbers. It is a deep-seated, archaic neurosis that distorts your perception of reality, forcing you to see every interaction as a zero-sum war for survival. Even when you have enough resources to cover your needs for years, this inner starvation prevents you from enjoying what you have, driving you to hoard, to micromanage, and to view the success of others as a direct, personal threat to your existence. You live in a state of perpetual emergency, your nervous system constantly flooded with cortisol, treating every financial transaction with the desperate intensity of a caveman fighting over the last scrap of meat on a frozen tundra. This mindset acts as a powerful, unconscious curse, creating the exact poverty it is so desperately trying to avoid by shutting down your creative intelligence and replacing it with a narrow, short-sighted survivalism. When you operate from a place of raw fear, you cannot think strategically, you cannot build deep, trusting alliances, and you cannot take the calculated, courageous risks required to generate genuine, long-term wealth. You project an aura of desperation and neediness that repels opportunities, clients, and collaborators, because people can instinctively sense when you are trying to use them to satisfy an insatiable, internal void. You become a psychological black hole, consuming energy, time, and money, yet remaining completely empty, because your internal container is riddled with the cracks of unexamined fear. To heal this deep-seated psychic lesion, you must have the courage to consciously sit with the raw sensation of your terror without reacting to it, allowing the waves of panic to wash over you until they reveal their true origin. You will find that this fear is rarely about money itself, it is the ancient, frozen grief of an unloved child, the fear of insignificance, or a deep-seated belief that you are fundamentally unwelcome in the universe. When you expose this illusion to the light of your conscious awareness, its power over your behavior begins to dissolve, allowing you to breathe deeply for the first time in your life. You begin to shift from a desperate survival mindset to an expansive, generative state of mind, realizing that true security is not a fortress built of gold, but your own fluid, creative capacity to respond to the changing tides of existence. 7. The neurosis of success without substance. Consider the absolute horror of achieving every single one of your material goals only to discover that your inner world remains completely barren, uncultivated, and dark. This is the ultimate nightmare of the modern achievement addict, the realization that you have spent your entire life climbing a ladder of success, sacrificing your health, your relationships, and your integrity, only to find that the ladder was leaning against the completely wrong wall. You see these individuals everywhere, hollowed-out millionaires, powerful executives who are strangers to their own children, and celebrities who destroy themselves with substances because they cannot endure the agonizing emptiness that greets them when the lights go down. They have achieved an impressive external victory, but internally, they have suffered a total, catastrophic defeat, degenerating into what I call successful neurotics. This tragic imbalance occurs because your ego has pursued external markers of progress while completely ignoring the urgent, non-negotiable demands of your deeper psyche, which cares nothing for your titles or your vanity. The soul does not speak the language of profit margins or social status, it speaks in the language of symbols, of meaning, of deep connection, and of the slow, organic process of self-realization. When you starve these deeper dimensions of your being in your single-minded pursuit of wealth, your unconscious will eventually rebel, manifesting as sudden panic attacks, severe depressive episodes, or a profound loss of meaning that makes all your achievements taste like ashes in your mouth. Your wealth becomes a golden tomb, a luxurious distraction that merely prevents you from seeing that you are a spiritual ghost. True prosperity can never be achieved by running ahead of your own psychological development. Your material growth must be an organic, outward expression of your internal maturity. You must build your inner foundation first, cultivating your self-awareness, resolving your core complexes, and forging an unshakable connection to your deeper values, before you attempt to build an empire in the physical world. Wealth without an underlying spiritual architecture is an incredibly dangerous substance, a magnifying glass that will simply amplify your existing flaws, vices, and self-destructive tendencies until they consume you. You must seek a wealth that is thick, heavy, and substantive, a success that is rooted so deeply in the fertile soil of your integrated self that it can withstand both the storms of adversity and the far more dangerous temptations of luxury. 8. The threshold of individuation. The ultimate purpose of your life is not the accumulation of capital, the achievement of comfort, or the avoidance of pain. It is the sacred, agonizing process of individuation, the journey toward becoming the unique, whole individual you were always meant to be. Wealth, peace, and freedom are not arbitrary prizes handed out by a benevolent universe to those who work hard or follow a specific set of rules. They are the natural, inevitable side effects of a human being who has completed the hard labor of psychic integration. You cannot force these states to arrive through sheer willpower or manipulation of the material world, just as you cannot force a flower to bloom by tearing open its petals with your bare hands. They are fruits that ripen slowly, growing naturally from the soil of a life that has been brought into perfect alignment with both the conscious and unconscious laws of nature. To cross this final threshold and claim your true inheritance, you must be willing to let go of your attachment to the collective definitions of success, stepping off the well-worn path of social conformity and venturing into the uncharted wilderness of your own soul. You must have the courage to stand completely alone, facing the terrifying silence of your own destiny, stripped of the comforting illusions, distractions, and excuses that the crowd uses to blind itself to the reality of death. This is the death of your old, small, fear-driven identity, a painful but utterly necessary crucifixion of the ego that must take place before your true, sovereign self can be reborn. It is a process that requires you to risk everything you think you are, to lose the life you planned in order to welcome the life that is waiting for you. When you emerge from this fire, you will find that your relationship with the material world has been entirely transformed. You no longer need wealth to validate your existence, because your value is now an unshakable, self-contained reality. You operate in the world with an effortless, fluid mastery, attracting resources not through frantic, manipulative effort, but through the magnetic pull of your integrated, authentic presence. You have found the peace that passes all human understanding, a stillness born from the fact that you are no longer at war with yourself, and you have claimed the only freedom that matters, the freedom to live as a whole, undivided human being. The wealth that arrives after this shift is no longer a chain that binds you or a mask that hides you. It is a sharp, elegant tool used by your higher self to leave a permanent, conscious mark upon the face of the earth. The illusions that have guided your frantic running have now been exposed to the cold, unforgiving light of your conscious awareness, and you stand at the most critical crossroads of your existence. You can choose to close this page, slip your comfortable mask back on, and slide back into the familiar, numbing routines of your collective hypnosis, continuing to chase a superficial wealth that will never satisfy your soul. Or, you can choose the harder, more courageous path of looking directly into your own internal depths, committing yourself to the lifelong labor of integrating your shadow, dismantling your false identity, and claiming your true, psychological sovereignty. Remember that the world does not need more wealthy ghosts, more hollow successes, or more terrified men hiding behind masks of power. It desperately cries out for whole, fully conscious individuals who have walked through the fire of self-examination and emerged as masters of their own destiny. If these words have broken through your defenses, you have already begun to see what the majority spends their entire lives desperately trying to avoid. True wealth belongs only to those who have the stomach to face their own inner darkness. If you have the raw, uncommon courage to recognize these patterns within yourself, do not let this moment of clarity slip away back into the unconscious. Join this collective journey of psychological awakening by subscribing to this channel now. I want you to go down to the comments section right now and write a specific truth you have been hiding from yourself. Tell me what your shadow has been doing with your money, or name the specific mask you are ready to burn. Let your comment be your first conscious act of defiance against your own illusions. Let the work begin today.